Petra Halst had worked at the Aldenmere Conservatory for 11 years, long enough to know every sound the old townhouse made. She knew the particular resonance of the recital hall when the morning light came through the east windows, and the way the practice rooms on the ground floor hummed faintly when more than 2 pianos were playing at once. She knew which step on the main staircase creaked, and which radiator rattled at 3:15, and she could identify every student in the building by their footfall in the corridor. She did not recognize the footfall that came through the front door on a Tuesday morning in October, because it was not the footfall of a student. The man who entered the conservatory's front hall did so quietly. He did not announce himself or ring the bell at the reception desk. He simply came in from the street, closed the door behind him without a sound, and stood. He wore a charcoal suit of the kind that costs more than Petra earned in a month, and a dark tie, and he carried nothing. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair going silver at the temples and a neat, close beard, and his face was the kind of face that had stopped being young before its time, not aged exactly, but settled into a gravity most faces never reached. He stood in the hall and looked at nothing in particular. Petra had come out of the staff room to collect a folder she had left at the reception desk. She stopped when she saw him. She knew who he was. Everyone in the city knew who Domenico Var was. Whether they knew the details or only the outline, they knew the name, and they knew what the name meant. The hush that could fall over a room when he walked in. The way certain conversations stopped mid-sentence. She had never expected to see that man standing in the front hall of a small music conservatory on a Tuesday morning, still as a held breath, listening. What he was listening to, she realized a moment later, was the piano. Down the hall in practice room 3, someone was playing a Mozart sonatina, the K545, the easy one, the one all the 7-year-olds learned first. It was being played haltingly, as 7-year-olds played it, with a small pause before each difficult passage and a careful, deliberate touch on the keys, as though the child understood that the notes deserved to be placed rather than struck. It was not remarkable playing. It was ordinary and effortful and careful. Domenico Var listened to it with his eyes closed. Petra did not collect her folder. She stayed where she was. After a moment he opened his eyes, and his gaze moved down the hall toward the practice room. He did not walk toward it. He was the kind of man who moved when he had decided to move, and he had not yet decided. Petra watched him the way she might watch a weather system, not afraid exactly, but aware that the atmosphere had changed. The door to practice room 3 opened. The woman who came out first was Lena Sorrell, the conservatory's junior piano instructor, 3 years on staff, quiet and precise and well-liked in the way of people who never made demands. She was in her early 30s, with dark hair worn back in a simple knot and warm brown eyes that missed very little. She was carrying a music folder and a pencil, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw him. She did not make a sound. She did not step back. Behind her, the small child who had been playing the piano appeared in the doorway and pressed herself briefly against Lena's side, not afraid, simply orienting, before looking up at the man in the hall with frank, unself-conscious curiosity. Petra could not have said afterward what exactly it was she saw in Domenico Var's face in that moment. She had no language for it. He had been still before. Now he was a different kind of still, the kind that comes not from composure but from the sudden, total suspension of everything a person had been about to do. The little girl had his eyes, the same shape, the same dark directness, and he was looking at her as though she were the solution to a calculation he had been running for years without knowing he was running it. Lena said quietly and without heat, "Clara, will you take your bag to the bench and wait for me? I'll be 1 minute." Clara went without complaint, with a last curious glance at the man in the hall. Lena looked at Domenico Var. He looked at her. Something passed between them that Petra could not read, old and weighted and not hostile. "There's a courtyard at the back," Lena said. "Come through." He followed her. Petra stood in the hall for a long moment. Then she went to make tea, because it was the only useful thing she could think of. The courtyard at the back of the Aldenmere was a small, paved space with a stone bench and a plane tree that had no business being as large as it was. In the autumn it dropped leaves onto the bench and the paving in a slow, patient way. Lena sat on the bench. Domniko Var did not sit. He stood with his hands at his sides in the way of a man who normally occupied space with authority, and was, for once, not certain whether he had the right. Lena spoke first. "Your assistant enrolled her," she said. "I didn't know whose instruction that was until I looked up the account name. I would have called you, but I thought—" She paused, considered. "I thought you should come here instead, see the room she plays in." He said nothing. "She's 7, Lena said. "Her name is Clara. She started piano in April and she practices every morning before school without being asked. She's kind to other children and she is honest to a fault, which I think she gets from her grandmother's side." A pause. "She has your eyes. I expect you noticed that." "Yes," he said. It was the first word he had spoken. 8 years ago, Lena said, her voice steady, her hands folded in her lap, "a man called Rino came to see me. He said you'd asked him to come. He said that what was between us had run its course and that you wished me well." She looked at Domniko Var the way a person looks at something they have learned to carry. "I believed him. I didn't fight it. I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought perhaps your world had caught up with you and I wasn't in the plan." Something moved in his face. He pressed it down. "Rino," he said. "I'm not asking you to explain it," Lena said. "It was 8 years ago. I haven't been waiting." She said it without unkindness. "I have a life here and a daughter and a job I love. I'm telling you because you deserve the truth of what happened and because Clara deserves to know her father if she decides she wants one." She paused. "That is her decision, not mine and not yours." He stood in the courtyard with his hands at his sides and looked at her for a long moment. He was a man who had spent his life making decisions that entire rooms waited on, and he was not making a decision now. He was absorbing something. Petra, who had come into the back corridor with 2 cups of tea and then found she could not interrupt, watched through the glass panel in the door. "What does she know?" he said. "That her father's name is Domniko," Lena said. "That he lives in the city, that I loved him very much once." She looked at the fallen leaves on the paving. "She's never asked me why he isn't here. Children understand more than we think." She knew somehow not to ask. Domniko Var was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Rino has not worked for me in 6 years." Lena looked up. "I'm not telling you that to undo what was done," he said. "I'm telling you because you told me the truth and you deserve the same." He held her gaze. "I spent 2 years trying to understand why you stopped answering. I decided eventually that you had made a choice. I thought it was mine to respect." The courtyard was quiet. The plane tree shed 1 leaf onto the stone bench between them. "Well," Lena said after a moment. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Not with bitterness. Petra had expected bitterness and found none, but with the calm, level attention of a woman who had learned to see things plainly. He looked back at her the same way. "Go home today," Lena said finally. "Clara's lesson ends at 4. She doesn't know you're here and I won't tell her tonight, but come back tomorrow morning." He asked only one question, and he asked it quietly. "Is there anything you need before then?" "No," Lena said. "There is nothing we need." He nodded once, as though that were not a small answer but a large one. Petra stepped back from the door before he came back through the corridor. She left the 2 cups of tea on the hall table, where he passed them on his way out without looking at them. The front door closed behind him in the same silence it had opened in. Petra stood in the hall and breathed. He came back the next morning at 8:45. Petra saw him from the staff room window. He came on foot, alone, no car at the curb, and he was carrying nothing. He wore the same kind of suit but a different tie, and he stood on the front step for a moment before he rang the bell, as though he wanted to be sure he had the right to do so. Petra let him in herself. She put him in the small waiting room off the hall, 2 chairs and a side table and a photograph of the conservatory in 1923, and told him Clara's lesson ended at 9:15. He thanked her. He sat in one of the chairs and did not take out his phone and did not appear to do anything at all. He simply waited. Petra, passing the door twice, found him the same way each time. Hands quiet, gaze steady, waiting with a patience she had not expected from a man of his kind. At 9:13 the piano stopped. At 9:15 the door to practice room 3 opened, and Clara came out ahead of Lena with her small bag on her shoulder and her music folder tucked under her arm, talking about something, the left-hand part, a bar she had not gotten right, and stopped when she saw the man in the doorway of the waiting room. She looked at him. He looked at her. He did not move until she spoke, and what she said was simply, "You're here." "Yes," he said. Clara considered him with the direct, unhurried appraisal that very young children apply to things they have been quietly thinking about for some time. Then she said, "Mama said your name is Domenico. That's a very long name." "It is," he said. "Most people call me something shorter." "What do they call you?" "Dom," he said. Clara seemed to find this reasonable. "Do you want to see the garden?" she said. "There's a very large tree." He looked at Lena. Lena watched from the doorway of the practice room, her hand resting on the frame, her face open and quiet. She gave the smallest nod. "Yes," he said, "I would like that." Clara took him to the garden, not by the hand, simply ahead of him, pointing out the tree as though she had planted it herself, and Lena followed at a little distance, and Petra watched from the staff room window and did not pretend she was doing anything else. In the garden, Clara showed him the plane tree and the stone bench, and the particular patch of moss on the north wall that she had apparently decided was hers. He listened to all of it. He sat where she told him to sit. When she climbed onto the bench beside him to show him something in her music folder, he looked at what she showed him with a gravity that a child's drawing of a treble clef deserved, apparently from him. At some point, Lena came and sat on the other side of the bench. They were not close. Clara was between them, which was both the fact of the matter and, Petra thought, the whole truth of the morning, that the distance between Domenico Var and Lena Sorrel would close or not close in its own time and at its own pace, and that neither of them would rush it, and that the child on the bench between them was not the reason they were there, but was the shape of something that had always been there, waiting to be found. At one point Lena said something Petra could not hear, and Domenico Var looked at her, a long, quiet look, and then turned his face toward the plane tree and let out a breath that had been, by the look of it, 8 years in the holding. Petra had worked at the Aldenmere for 11 years. She had taught theory to children who would never be musicians and to a few who would. She had made tea in the staff room and listened to the radiator and walked past the photograph of the old building 1,000 times. She was not, she would have told you, a person given to sentiment. But she stood at the staff room window for a long time that morning, watching a feared and powerful man sit on a stone garden bench with a 7-year-old girl who had his eyes, and a woman of quiet courage who had not waited for him, but had not, in the most important sense, ever stopped believing that decency was its own reward. She made fresh tea. She did not bring it out. Some things are better left to find their own warmth.